Hello, and welcome to another episode of In Plain Sight. Now, today we're going to begin with three words that many people seem to have forgotten how to say. I don't know. Not because nobody has investigated, not because evidence doesn't exist, but because uncertainty is often less satisfying than certainty. And the origins of COVID-19 remain one of the most politically charged questions of our time. Was it a natural spillover from animals to humans? Was it an accident involving scientific research? Was it something more sinister? And depending on who you ask, the answer is obvious. And that should immediately make you suspicious, because whenever a complex question produces simple certainty, there's usually a problem. So today, we're going to look at what we know and what we don't, and why unfinished answers have become fertile ground for politics, conspiracy theories, and misinformation. So why this question matters? Well, for some people, the origins debate is historical. For others, it's central to everything that subsequently followed. Because if the virus emerged naturally, that tells us one story about risk. If it emerged through a laboratory-related incident, that tells us something else. And understanding origin matters because preventing the next possible pandemic depends on understanding how this one began. And this isn't an academic exercise, it is a public health question. It's a biosafety question. It's certainly a political question. And unfortunately, it's become a tribal question too. So let's start with what we know, the basics. COVID-19 emerged in Wuhan, China in late 2019. The first recognized cluster was associated with cases identified in Wuhan during December 2019. And the virus responsible was later named SARS-CoV-2. Its genome was shared internationally in January 2020, and it allowed researchers around the world to begin studying it. None of that is controversial. The controversy begins when we ask, how did it get into humans? So that brings us to the zoonotic spillover theory. Historically, this is how many infectious diseases emerge. This isn't new. HIV, Ebola, avian flu, SARS, MERS. All of these have zoonotic spillover. They originate in animals and then transfer to humans when they have mutated. Because humans and animals interact. A pathogen adapts, transmission occurs. That, again, isn't controversial. Now, the WHO SAGO report published in 2025 concluded that the growing body of evidence remains most consistent with zoonotic emergence involving animals and human contact pathways. Importantly, however, the report does not claim definitive proof. And that's where nuance matters, because evidence pointing in one direction is not the same thing as certainty. Now that brings us to the laboratory incident theory, the second major hypothesis, which is that the virus entered the human population through a laboratory-related accident. Were you paying attention to what I said there? Laboratory-related accident, not a bioweapon, not deliberately released to cull the population, not part of a cabal asserting world domination. And the problem is that many discussions immediately jump from possibility to certainty without any evidence. There is currently no publicly available evidence proving deliberate release. Likewise, there's no publicly available evidence conclusively proving a laboratory accident either. The WHO report states that key information remains unavailable, oddly, and that the possibility cannot be fully assessed because of the missing data. Now, that isn't confirmation, but nor is it a dismissal. It's uncertainty. And that is where the conversation often lies, in the uncertainty. But that brings us where both sides go wrong. And this is where things become really interesting, because both sides often exaggerate their claims. You have one side that says the laboratory leak theory has been completely debunked. Yeah, that's not true at all. The WHO report didn't even say that definitively. It didn't even allude to the fact. Whereas the other side says the laboratory leak theory has been proven. And that is also not true. And there is no evidence to prove that anywhere either. And the WHO report does not say that or even allude to the fact. Both sides frequently mistake preference for evidence, and people often believe the theory that best fits their existing worldviews, which is understandable. That's human nature, but it's not science. Now, the politics of uncertainty are where it gets really interesting. The origins debate stopped being purely scientific very early on. National interests became involved. Personal interests became involved. International relationships became involved. Media narratives became involved. Political identities became involved. And once that happens, evidence often becomes secondary. And people start defending teams rather than analysing the actual information that exists. Questions become interpreted as loyalty tests, and doubt becomes suspicious. Certainty is rewarded, and complexity becomes and remains very, very unpopular. But there's a cost to unfinished answers. The greatest damage may not be the uncertainty itself. The damage comes from how people respond to uncertainty on either side of the spectrum. When institutions fail to communicate uncertainty honestly, trust suffers. That is what we've seen time and time again. When commentators present speculation as fact, trust suffers. What we've seen time and time again. When governments appear defensive, trust absolutely suffers. When conspiracy influencers claim certainty they cannot possibly possess, trust suffers. And that result is what we've seen repeatedly since 2020. People become less interested in evidence and just more interested in narratives. So, where does that leave us? Well, perhaps the most important lesson about the origins debate is not about bats or laboratories or Wuhan itself. It's about intellectual humility. It's about having the willingness to say, this is what we know, this is what we suspect, and this is what we don't know and remains unresolved. 3 elements of honesty. The WHO's most recent assessment does not provide a final answer. It does provide something very valuable, though. It's a reminder that evidence on both sides matters, but also that uncertainty exists. And that reality doesn't change simply because certainty feels more comfortable. Some people are wrong. Some people are half right for the wrong reasons. And some institutions told the truth really badly. And as always, on In Plain Sight, we're trying to sort out which is which.